Halo, Season 2, Episode 8. Now, I can honestly say that I have been looking forward to this episode for a while now. And that's not because I expect it to be good, it's because it's over. I think it's dubious whether or not this gets a Season 3, which means that I have plenty of time to recover from the impending aneurysm that has come on due to the writing and production of this
pile of shit.
Now, we know that Paramount is in trouble financially. It's probably the politest way to put it. And you can tell that from Season 2. The CGI is worse than Season 1, and they have set up a season where the amount of CGI that should be required is significantly higher, but they have gone out of their way as much as possible to obscure what is going on so that they can prioritize the CGIs to where it is necessary rather than where it would be nice to see what's going on. And that clearly has to be down to a lack of funds, because the whole season feels like either the budget was the same, whereas realistically they needed more money to pull this off, or the budget was cut. And either way, that is not a good thing. Now, there are people out of there who are raving about this episode as being more like Halo. Now, I could honestly say it is, a bit. Now, while you can make a case that it feels more like Halo, it's just done wrong. The entire storyline is paced atrociously. We rush through things where we should be taking our time, i.e. the payoffs, and we take our time with stuff that doesn't matter and adds nothing. We never get more than a superficial look at anything that is worthwhile. And because of that, none of the characters resonate. And what I mean by that is I just don't care. And it's because the characters see so little development, so little actual, I guess the only way to put it is arc, that there's little to no growth, and you just can't relate to these characters, largely because their storylines and the storyline as a whole is, well, simply put, fucking stupid. And this is down, I can only assume, to the pacing, because the parts of the story which should be used to develop these characters are just rushed through. And if I was going to literally cite the biggest example of this, it would be this episode. We have so much going on in a single episode that nothing gets any real time spent upon it. And this is the episode where everything is coming together. It should be the payoff episode. The episode where we actually get action, meaning, conclusion, and we get a little bit of some and absolutely sweet FA of the others. Now, I've started very negative, and it's because I'm just so disappointed. And I knew I was going to be disappointed from the end of the last episode, when you clearly were going to have an episode which had a fleet battle. Finally, we were going to get to the Halo. I mean, fuck. We've got an episode where Chief's in his fucking armor, which, well, that hasn't happened very often this season. And those are, in my mind, the key events that should be explored in this episode. And even then, it's too much to explore in a single episode. This episode, ideally, should have been probably 2 episodes. And then when you take all of the crap that they add in on top of what I feel the key events of this episode should be, you're probably talking a third. So you're talking at least 2 to 3 episodes crammed into one episode. Now, I've started this very negative. And I'll be honest, most of my view of this entire season has been very negative. That aside, this is not the worst episode. In fact, it's probably one of the best. But with the entire Halo TV series, the bar is so low that that's not something to really brag about. It's not saying much. And this is all down to the writing, the pacing. I mean, Christ, they invented their own timeline, the Silver Timeline, so that they had an artistic license, but every single decision that they've chosen to make has led us to a worse outcome, a worse storyline, a more convoluted storyline than the canon we had. And the reason why I feel a lot of people think the show is bad is because it doesn't feel like the games. It's not the same story. It doesn't feel like the books because it's not the same story. There's not the same development, not the same care, not the same attention, and everything of meaning is just glossed over. And as a result, it just feels like some sort of bastardized abomination that, while it occasionally feels like Halo, it takes everything that the universe was, decides to add its own spin to it, and poisons the recipe. Now, I couldn't say this better than I did in the last episode. The writers change things, they add things, and either don't care or just don't understand the gravity of the changes that they make, particularly the effect that those changes will have on us, the audience. And then they don't even understand the gravity of those changes further down the line on the overarching narrative, because they keep lending from the canon and then twisting it to fit what they want. But because the things that they're pulling are based on previous things having happened, they're having to change it even more significantly than they were already intending in order to try to tell a coherent story. I mean, I say try because the story is pretty shit and barely coherent. There's a lot of nonsense moving around, and I would imagine that you will probably hear me say, this doesn't make sense a lot of times during this review. So I guess with that, we should just go ahead and start running through this. So, we actually have a change of approach here. Rather than pick up where we left off, like we normally would, we instead, as far as I can tell, pick up at the point the episode pretty much ends, or potentially even beyond the end of the episode, with Chief speaking to the monitor of this installation. This being, I think, my third or fourth run-through of this episode now. There's a fairly significant missing section of context within this episode, and it is really telling, and it is hard to know exactly where that missing context goes because of how they are communicating between Chief and Monitor now, and how the communication goes between Chief and Monitor at the end. It seems weird. But we join Chief and Monitor discussing something which has happened, where Chief has seen something and he is questioning what it is. And that is pretty much the substance of this conversation. It just feels janky as the very next scene jumps to something completely different and is not related to this opening conversation in any way, shape, or form. So they raise some interesting questions of what's happened in between, but then they instantly move to a subplot, which, yeah, it basically loses any sort of impact of them doing this because it's not directly related to Chief's character at all. Now, the one thing that I would like to add is by starting this episode in such a way, it serves to dispel any anticipation, or at least it did for me, because we know ultimately where the episode is leading before the episode has led us there. Now, they clearly thought that this would be clever, but it's just not. Now, just regarding what the monitor is saying, he's talking about something that is on the Halo, and Chief asks, what was it? What is down there? And they are talking about the dark corners of the installation.
What is that thing? Why is it here?
So he's seen something within the Halo. That's what we can take from this. Now, my guess is that it's Gravemind, and what they've done is they've merged the games of Halo 1 and Halo 2, and they're dealing with the storyline now of Halo 2 within the first installation, so Installation 04. But what this is never actually addressed in the series at all. This episode, there is no mention. There is just a missing chunk of time, and we don't know what happened. Now, they've chosen to keep that aside, and I honestly don't know why, because it now just makes it feel incomplete. We know there's something missing because the episode, and sorry to spoil this, but the episode ends further forward by a considerable space than what I would consider the normal end to be. And we'll come on to that later. I guess it just feels like it's a loose end. There's a missing piece. But if you wanted to withhold something to Season 3, then why even have this conversation at all? Why not just open the episode up in the exact same situation as you did?
Dark places contain dark things. What did you find down there?
So instead of answering anything regarding the monitor questions, we jump back into the Miranda storyline, which is what we're going to call this for the foreseeable future. And we get introduced to the retarded biologist, Janine, who seems incredibly interested in the artifact. Now, as part of this scene, Miranda suddenly gets, like, quite concerned and demands to know if Janine had touched the artifact, because suddenly these spores that are in the artifact, that no one has any idea what they are, have reactivated and started growing. If only she had thought about that and shown such concern when she grabbed it off the dead alien, which could have equally been as significant a risk as what's going on right now. It might have meant that she had the moral high ground. Instead, she's just the same level of retard. I don't think I can do it, guys. I don't think I can watch this fucking bit again. Like, what is actually up with this stupid fucking tune? And with how sheepish she was being, it's blatantly fucking obvious that she touched it. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the first time I watched this, I was actually laughing at just how fucking stupid the whole section is. I just can't even fake that reaction anymore. It's just sad. All I can say is, she is the most retarded person in this show. And that is such a hard thing to do. Now, the show has in general treated all of their so-called intelligent characters, the people who have degrees and who are supposedly the leaders and should know something, like they actually lack any form of anything that you could class as intelligence. My biggest problem with this is why the fuck would a biologist barehand touch an artifact that no one knows what's going on? I know Miranda did it beforehand, but Miranda's a fucking idiot. We already know that. But why would this biologist, when they've already detected spores, then just interact with the spores and touch them with no protective clothing or anything like that? Like, you don't know what the spores are. They could be anything. They could do anything. And a biologist would fucking know that. I can honestly say this does not make sense. This would not happen unless it was by complete accident. But this biologist made a conscious decision to do this. Now, if I was a biologist in real life, I'd actually be insulted that this fucking retard supposedly shared my profession. Even if it is fictitiously, I'd be insulted. She's obviously not washed her hands. She's now touching another person.
Janine.
And now she's infected, but she's a biologist, so she would know that something's wrong. I've actually got a new theory. I think this music is like she's deliberately infecting everyone, but to a happy-go-lucky theme tune. I think that makes sense. I think she's like, fuck it, I don't like anyone here, I'm just going to kill everyone. Now, I did say rather flippantly in the last review, when Miranda grabbed the sample case, that I actually hope that it was a flesh-eating virus that was inside of it, just so it would kill all of these stupid assholes. I never actually thought that this is the Flood. This obviously raises questions that they're never going to answer, but why was the dead Forerunner clutching it towards them, almost protecting it? That's how it looked to me. They made a conscious effort before they died to have a hold of the sample container. You know what it is? It seems just like a pure dog shit way to release the Flood. And it still continues with the fucking music. But yeah, anyways, the Flood got released because the trained biologist is a fucking idiot. What an awesome, believable show. So we end up back with Perez getting ready for a jump. I just don't understand the creative decision to endlessly show us the inside shots of their helmets. All we can see is their fucking eyes. So anyways, the ship gets hit, and as far as we're aware, pretty much everyone dies, apart from Kai and Perez. Now, I have frozen it specifically at this point for one key reason, because the first thing I noticed the first time I watched this was that the ship explodes from the front. The front, which is angled away from the enemy. Now, I might just be nitpicking here, but how is that possible? You're so far away from the enemy that it defies physics for you to be able to shoot the front and blow the ship up from the front of the ship without going through the back of the ship. But let's just gloss over it, because that's how the writers want it to happen based on how they've written it, where nothing makes fucking sense. Now, actually, I just noticed this on this watch through, and I quite like that. That right there is some bugger's arm. Just their arm floating away in space. But it does seem an oddly clean cut. Like they might have just took a picture of someone and cut the arm off as a straight line. But yeah, I must admit, that did make me chuckle a little. And obviously, it wouldn't be Halo if we didn't see some more eyes within 30 seconds of seeing eyes, within 10 seconds of seeing eyes. So Perez eventually stabilizes herself. With the G's that she must have been doing in that spin, it's surprising that she didn't just pass out with that hyperventilating as well.
What bridge point? There.
Pretty bloody convenient. Out of all of the ships in the Covenant fleet that you could land on, you land on, well, we assume one of the only ones to actually have been successfully breached. So we have a little bit of chit-chat between Chief and Parangovsky. Parangovsky's trying to butter Chief up to basically further our own plans. Yap. I wondered how long we'd get before we saw Quan. There's just too many subplots going on, and we're having to cycle through all of them before we actually get to anything meaningful that anyone cares about. Now, since we last saw her, she's basically been hiding in the ship, supposedly doing nothing. Now, Soren's come back for a gun instead of immediately running after his family in the last episode. What I don't understand is that for a space pirate, why wasn't he packing when he went to save Kessler in the first place? Now, I'm not going to say it again just yet, but you know what I mean.
Are you a bad man?
Yes, he most definitely is a bad man.
Why would you think that?
You're in jail.
So are you.
Ah, touché. So anyways, we have now moved on to Kessler, his mom, and Ackerson, who are all in the brig. Guess who is in the cell next door? It's Janine, the retarded biologist. And look, she's now able to infect other people. What a small world this show is. And we're back to Perez. It just feels so scattergun. You never spend more than a minute to 90 seconds with any group, and as a result, nothing is properly addressed.
Kai!
So they get ambushed, and they have to fight a fighting retreat.
You gotta hold this corridor! Pick your target!
Now, she did just say, we've got to hold this corridor, and then all of a sudden, we're not in a corridor. We're in a room, and it looks like the hangar.
It's the fleet!
Yep, the fleet's here, and I know what you're thinking. This should be pretty cool. Or not. So the fleet comes in, and the fleet starts to get bitch slapped. And as per those two clips, you can see there's a lot of explosions happening on the UNSC ships. They're not happening on the Covenant ship. But then again, what did we expect? They did tell us in the story in episode 5 that it takes 3 ships to kill 1 Covenant corvette, like the ship that they're on. So it's pretty obvious that the UNSC should lose this fight. But the one thing I will say is, if you really were here to see a big fleet battle in this episode, you should probably just turn it off now, because this is the longest amount of time that we will actually spend looking at the ship. Now, the other thing that I would just like to point out here, if you look at the display, the red to green ratio clearly shows that the UNSC is outnumbered and they're outgunned. Now, this is something to come back to later, but if you think that they've told you that it's 3 ships to 1 ship, this should be a bloodbath.
Something you can't see.
And now we're back to the coin crap.
Was it luck? Or did you make it come up heads?
And there you have it. Was it luck, or did you make it come up heads? So, opening the door to Chief being able to change reality just because he wills it. And they don't seem to think that this is an issue. We've gone from Chief just being lucky and badass to his awesomeness having to be explained as he can manipulate the universe around him and bend it to his will. And this whole scene just feels to me a bit like the scene between Neo and Agent Smith where he slows down the bullets, because with how they're writing this, he's basically in the Space Matrix. It's just shit. It's a shit explanation. It's 100% immersion breaking for something that never needed to be explained. And yet they take their time to explain this when there's so much other shit that really needed an explanation and that got absolutely nothing.
John, you've gone and saved them.
You have no idea what I can do.
By this point, I'm pretty much checked out. Speaking of which, UNSC. I think that might be a UNSC ship as well, which is exploding. Any Covenant ships? I don't see them. Blah, blah, blah. McKee's happy because she's this close to the Halo. Now, judging by the dimensions, it's about the right size for what the writers need to just keep pushing that shit through a ring. It's just the whole show is
One big pile of shit.
So, Cortana says that the ship is going to break up. McKee says that Cortana's loyalty to the chief is a problem, and then McKee destroys Cortana. It's like McKee only just came to the revelation that she probably can't trust Cortana. Or maybe she was using Cortana, and if she was, and if it was shown that basically she was manipulating Cortana the whole time, that might have been good, but personally I think I'm reading into it too much and giving the writers infinitely more credit than they deserve.
God damn it! We're gonna start this bullshit step in a bullshit battle that meant nothing! Now we stop!
Sakai and Perez basically leave their defensible position trying to get to the bridge to accomplish the mission that they're there for in the first place. But I'm pretty sure that they tried to get to the bridge when they landed on the ship and then had to basically retreat, having lost people because it was too heavily defended. And yet now they're supposedly going to the bridge again, even though they were outnumbered, outgunned, and couldn't get there with more people. But, you know, let's just ignore that again. More eyes. So they run out of bullets and then start picking up Covenant guns, which at this point I guess is a nod to the games. Well, if that wasn't the twin needlers, definitely is. And I'll be honest, this gave me a mild amount of enjoyment, especially as Perez was shot. I mean, that was probably the best part of the episode. It could have been so much better though. They could have just killed her, and Kai could have been using the two needlers and being a badass. And while the enemy is still coming in and there's only like 4 or 5 of them left, they just stop to have a loving little chat. And look, there's more ships getting blown up and none of them are Covenant. You might think, why does he keep pointing this out? We'll get there. Now, I just don't understand the need to obscure so much. They've done it so many times in this season, and you just can't see what's going on.
That's the chief.
Now, if they'd filled the entire season with more stuff like this, it might have had a chance. It really might have. And at least he actually looks like Chief now.
This is the most powerful fleet we have. They won't last a day.
I'm not leaving anyone behind.
So Chief gets them all off the ship, but Kai clearly stays behind. I would imagine that it's to spike or not to spike. That is the question. Although I'm pretty sure the answer is no, seeing as it'll kill everyone in the system. Then we end up moving back to Soren and his distraction of a story arc. So he is navigating his way to his wife by, I guess, dodging comatose zombies? Because that's definitely what these guys look like. Then logically we rejoin his wife, because this show can't spend more than about 45 to 60 seconds with any story arc at any one time. Now, I froze it here for one specific reason, and it's because of the lack of continuity. Now, I know that that is a weird thing to be pulling them apart for here, seeing as their writing is dog shit, but what we can see is we can see the guard here is perfectly fine. He's in shot, and you can see him.
Wake up, do something!
Then we see the back of the guard, who is again completely fine, but apparently completely unresponsive. And Janine has now mutated enough that she can contort her bones sufficiently to fit through the bars to try to attack them, and all the while the guard is still just stood there. So Ackerson saves them, which is completely plausible, seeing as he just reached through the bars and took the guard's gun. I mean, granted, the guard is comatose, which is interesting, but... And now the back of his neck's completely fucked up. His face is fucked up. Like, did this all just happen within the last, 10 seconds? Because he was completely fine. And what it is they shot the other scenes without him having his makeup on, but it makes it look ridiculous. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I would have noticed that. I don't know much about armed forces, but I'm pretty sure that any service sidearm has more than, 7 rounds? I'm pretty sure it was 7 shots that he fired. Might be 8, but either way, it seems an impressively small clip. The other thing I'd just like to obviously discuss here is that, how did the guard get infected? When did the guard get infected? It seems stupid, the show. It seems weird to say that, seeing as I've been saying it for about 6 episodes now. My assumption is that the parasite that Janine produced infected the guard. Janine was infected well before she went into the cell, and she's only just mutated to the point where she is physically altered, and yet the guard's already at that point. When the guard came into the room, he was clearly in control of his own faculties. So if he was infected by the parasite, wouldn't he have gone ow, or noticed it biting him, or it forcing its way into his body, or however it infects them? Because, I mean, Christ knows. And if that did happen, wouldn't he go to, I guess, the medical bay? It doesn't make sense with regards to the timeline, or how anyone would react. And later this is going to become a bit more of an issue, because every instance that we see them, they don't turn instantaneous. So why aren't people aware of the spread? Why hasn't someone not been infected but seen what's going on and basically warned people in the base? Why hasn't someone been bit or had it forced into them and then gone for medical attention? It just seems plot convenient. It's contrived as fuck. So anyways, the guard turns his attention to Ackerson. Now, if I had my way, I'd just let the guard rip him apart, because we really do need to start thinning these side stories as much as possible, just so we can actually spend, if there is a season 3, more time with the actual protagonist.
From the Covenant ship.
What the hell does that mean?
So that's Halsey back in the big leagues. So, just to cut this section down a little bit, Perengovsky wants Chi to go straight to the Halo, but instead he's going to go and rescue Cortana.
Why is he trying to board an empty Covenant ship?
It's not empty. Not for him.
It's just an AI. You'll make him another one.
No, she won't. Can you not remember? I mean, I know we have to think back to season 1, and it was oh such a long time ago, and not massively worth thinking about. But they, as in the writers, set up this universe where Cortana is the only AI, because to make an AI, you have to liquefy someone's brain, which is, funnily enough, illegal in this universe. When Cortana was being made the first time, Halsey did it, literally, against Perengovsky's orders. She did not want it to be done. And now Perengovsky is just make him another one. So whose brain are you going to liquefy? It's rather flippant with how they suggest that. And it betrays Perengovsky as a character, because they've butchered her personality this season compared to who she was in season 1. But it also betrays their own core universe building that they did in season 1. It's just nonsense. And the ironic thing is that Halsey, or at least season 1 Halsey, would almost certainly have said exactly the same thing. But because they've put her on this sort of like redemption arc where she isn't quite as narcissistic and sociopathic as she was in season 1, seems to understand that Chief, like the Chief we know, wouldn't want another AI. He wants Cortana. So she tells him how best to make entrance into the ship. So then we end up back with the Monitor, where he now seems to be discussing his actions before he got to Halo. Now, this would have made a lot more sense if the first conversation that he had at the beginning of the episode was actually set up in a similar way, so that he was relaying the events of the episode back to the Monitor, but that isn't really what they did. So this just seems like a bit of a weird interaction compared with the structure of the episode that they set up.
Choice in the matter. 5,
Cortana,
4,
you don't know everything.
3.
You don't know everything? The writers clearly don't know fucking anything. Every time I see this and hear this line, I can't help but just think, fuck off. So John's got space magic now. Like I said last episode, they're painting him as having the ability to change the universe around him. So now he's like Neo in the bloody Matrix. And because he's magic now, he can just punch a Covenant console and download Cortana into his suit. How does he do this? What makes him able to do this? What the hell are you actually thinking, you fucking retards? It just makes no sense at all. This whole show is an absolute mess, with just things that don't make any sense. And that actually I'd go as far as to say, defy reason. And this feels like it's a course correction from her being liquid in John's brain that was in a Petri dish. It's just awful, especially now as the brain goo is all over the floor, so Cortana's downloaded herself into the Covenant computer. You could just alleviate all of this by actually staying true to the source material and have Cortana in his suit. Because now we've got Cortana in his suit, and his suit isn't designed to have an AI. Because in the games, it has a slot that you can put a fucking AI into. But seeing as Cortana is the only AI, these suits clearly would not have been designed to put an AI in. So if you just did that, had lots of AIs, you'd be able to just put them in the suit. Instead, we have to write utter fucking nonsense like this in order to fix the utter shit that you wrote before. So Soren arrives in the nick of time, kills the guard, frees his family in Ackerson. Next. Chief survives a head-on collision crash with the Halo, which I actually appreciate. It's a nod to the games, because in the games, Chief survives a re-entry from outer space and collides with a planet and survives. So I can get on board with this. I believe it. I think it's a good nod to the games. But then, rather than focus on the mission, we take a moment just to admire the Halo. Well, to be fair, it is the first time that we've been here in 2 seasons.
We need to find the key.
I don't know everything, but I'd suggest looking near the large structure over there.
I will give credit where credit is due. Cortana, after 2 seasons, finally starts to feel like Cortana, even if she doesn't really look like Cortana. Because that quip could have been taken directly from one of the games. Because that's exactly how she would speak to John. So finally, after, 17 episodes, we're starting to get something which is actually slightly reminiscent of Halo. I'm starting to think that he's actually broken more guns than he's had fights in this season. So unfortunately, Perez survives. And she's on a ship now, leaving the Covenant ship.
Where's Kai?
And Kai stayed on board of the Covenant ship. I'm not quite sure why she's waited so long in order to do what she's planning to do here, seeing as the Spartans that she came on with are all off of the ship. It just seems like she's dithered a little bit. But the one thing I will say is, do you see all of the ships that are getting blown up by this one ship? The other thing I would like to say is UNSC, 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 UNSC. UNSC. There's a lot of UNSC ships beside this ship, and that's going to be important soon. You just have to trust me, but it will be important. There's a couple more being blown up. They're both UNSC as well.
What are they doing?
So yep, Kai literally drives the ship straight through the assault cruiser. Now, again, we can see UNSC ships here, and again, that will be important soon. Don't worry, mate, she's not dead. You just survived a head-on crash with the Halo easily enough. But, of course, we're going to have to wait till Season 3 to find out that she's not dead.
Confirmed. Assault carrier destroyed, Admiral.
We have the upper hand.
Now, look at that display again. It makes it look even, but it shouldn't be. Now, I'm guessing that they're saying that the destruction of the assault carrier, basically when it exploded, it took out a lot of ships. But obviously, in the images that we've just seen, there was a lot of UNSC ships there as well. So they did not come out of this unscathed. Now, we know that in every image of this fight that we've seen, the UNSC has lost ships, whereas we don't really see Covenant ships explode. And we know from the beginning of this fight that the UNSC was outnumbered. So how has the destruction of this one ship turned the tide? We know from the canon that you set up in episode 5 that for the UNSC, they will lose 3 ships to every Covenant corvette killed. So it's a 3-1 loss. So unless you have 3 times the numbers, you don't win this fight. You lose. And this makes it look like it is still evens. And if it is evens, then the UNSC should still lose. Now, Kai tells us herself that the fleet won't survive the day. It's not because of one carrier. It's because they're just outgunned and outnumbered. And she knows, because she was the person who told us, that you lose 3 ships to every 1 Covenant ship. And this is a problem because they're just pushing the outcome to go a certain way because they need it to go that way. And it breaks all of the development that they've done, all of the world building, all of the lore that they've set up with regards to why the Covenant are more superior. It's just a lazy, unimaginative, never-ending torrent of shit. And guess what? It makes no sense. So Miranda and Halsey start chatting.
A major problem. I think that the artifact we brought back from the archaeological site, I think it was a sample container.
Oh shit, so that artifact that you just picked up willy-nilly and took out not knowing what it was, turned out to be dangerous? Well, don't you guys look like fucking geniuses?
Stay where you are. I'm on my way to you.
So everyone starts turning, because apparently the HQ was filled with infected people. How? We don't know. Seeing as they're supposed to all be stood there like retarded zombies before they develop the ability to infect anyone. And surely someone would have noticed that. Now I've just paused it here, just so you can look at Halsey's reaction. Now that to me looks like horror, fear, maybe mortified, and this is going to be important later on. Now it appears that the flood can spread in so many different ways, either by being bitten, having the bug burrow into you, perhaps even by being bitten by an infected person, or having an infected person touch you, as Janine was touching people, unless of course she got it by ingesting the spores on her apple, which would mean that she never washed her hands after touching the alien object. I'm sorry, I can't deal with this seriously. I just can't. It's just too fucking retarded that they are painting a biologist who would understand spores, bacteria, all of those things. Why would they act in this way? There's no plausible explanation in any way, shape, or form. So Soren, Quan, and the gang are walking through the corridors that they took to enter. However, this time, they're full of zombies who are now awake. And yes, I am going to keep calling them zombies, because that's exactly what they remind me of. And the zombies start to chase after them. So Soren tells them all to go, and the corridor that they need to take is literally right behind them, and yet they're not moving. It's a good 15-20 seconds that they just stand around before they get moving. Again, I just despair. So Quan gets cornered, surrounded, and you're just like, oh, she's about to get munched. Finally, thought I, we are about to see Quan get ripped apart. Finally, this extraneous person in the storyline is about to be removed violently from the storyline, and by clipping that, we'll be able to dedicate more time, if it gets a season 3, to characters that, in my opinion, actually matter. I was loving this. I was on the edge of my seat. She's finally going to get killed. Nope. All we got was basically an epic blue ball moment. And instead of a moment that I would actually have enjoyed, we get this shit.
I knew you'd find me.
So with that comment, I thought, okay, you're Gravemind. And when you said, I knew you'd find me, you were talking about the spores. And that would make sense, because the ghost told her how to open all of the trials in order to get into the lab. But what I don't understand is why they chose to use the same actor that died in the first episode for this character, if they're not supposed to be linked. So if it's Gravemind, why are you using her?
We knew you would deliver us.
Again, that sounds like Gravemind.
Who are you? I am you. Protector. Was you. So long ago, no one remembers.
So she's a previous protector. A protector of what? What is the protector? What does the protector do? We're about to find out that the protector can apparently stop the flood.
All your ancestors are here with me.
How are all her ancestors here with her? Now that does sound like a very Gravemind thing to say, because Gravemind is effectively a shared consciousness. It feeds on the consciousness of its victims to create its own consciousness. But the problem with that is her ancestors haven't been consumed by the flood. So that then starts to make me think that no, it's not Gravemind.
It knows you, Quan Ha.
But then we have the ghost talking about Gravemind as if it's a separate entity. And then that doesn't make sense that it's suggesting that it's Gravemind to begin with. So if that's the case, then who the hell is the ghost? And why is the ghost magic? Why can the ghost influence the flood? If the ghost is a protector, then does that mean that Quan is going to be able to mentally control the flood? Because I genuinely think that that is the way that they're going to go. Just to inject Quan as a magical character and make her a main protagonist of this series. It's just going to end up the trope where the girl is going to be the key to everything. And you know what? I haven't seen that in all of 5 minutes. But more so, if this ghost isn't Gravemind and is benevolent, let's say like a protector of mankind, then why the fuck did she guide Quan to the flood spores in the first place? Why show her the dreams to open the door? None of it is explained. None of it will probably ever be explained or ever make sense anyways. But the whole thing is just underdeveloped crap.
Go. I can't hold them for long.
Do you see what I mean, though? Like, if it's not Gravemind, it's just space magic. And I mean, well, you've already got Chief who's got space magic, so why not make another character have space magic?
It starts off as inert spores. There were trace amounts on the object we took from the...
I actually can't fucking believe that. So this just goes from a plot hole to an actual plot crater, is the only way to describe it. And it's literally in what she says. So the casing had trace amounts of the spores on it. Not in it, on. So the problem with that is if there was trace amounts of spores on the casing, why the fuck isn't she infected? She should be ground zero. She picked it up with her bare hands, so she should have the spores and should be infected. infected if it's passing through touch. And you can only assume that it is passing through touch because of the way that they've set the story. Because Janine basically kills a guy and then ends up in the brig. And yet when Soren is trying to get to rescue them from the brig, Janine then sends basically the flood thing out, which we assume infects the guard. But when Soren's making his way, he passes zombies who are already infected. So the only way that that infection could have spread is when she was touching people in the lab. But then what's more retarded about the whole thing is there's still people walking around in the lab. So everyone in the lab must have gone absolutely mental. And then what's more retarded is anyone who's infected stands around like a zombie for a certain period of time. Surely people around them would notice this. Surely people around them would call a doctor? It doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. But least of all that makes sense is the fact that she isn't infected.
Stimulated by proximity to living tissue.
This is remarkable. It's beautiful.
This Halsey just doesn't make sense. She literally watched in horror as one of those things buried its way into someone's skull through their eye. And she's excited, she's fascinated, rather than being horrified. Miranda actually has a normal response here. Halsey's just a psychopath. So yeah, Halsey's infected.
I didn't mean it when I said I didn't want Kessler to be like you. I didn't mean it.
At least she finally admitted that. And I'm gonna be 100% honest here, I really like this part. I was so frightened that all of these characters were going to get off of Onyx with no detriment. And it's refreshing that they felt comfortable with effectively losing one of those characters. And if I had to say that they were going to lose one character, I did not think it was going to be Lara. I actually didn't see this coming at all. And that is one of the only times during Halo that I can honestly say that in a good way. The way that they did it, the execution was really good. And the reasoning, as we're about to see, makes sense.
What are you doing?
You're a good father. Don't run from it. He needs you.
He is a good dad. When it came down to it, he has tried to protect his son all the time, and you. And it's good that you've realised that. I mean, yes, is he the most moral person in the universe? No. And you can't say that about him. Is he prone to violence against other people? Yes. But he seems to do it to protect either his position or his family. And by protecting his position, he in turn protected his family. So the one thing you can say about Soren is he's actually a good father. But as I said before, the rationale behind why she does this, she's infected and she doesn't want to harm her family. So she shuts the door and basically stays behind. And that is believable, plausible. It's what a mother would do. It's one of the few moments in this entire season which I 100% agree with and can actually say was executed really well in a believable manner. I would love to have the entirety of this fight in this scene. It's actually really decent. There are a couple of critiques I would have. I can't help but feel that throughout fight, the camera work is extremely janky. And at times, it genuinely feels and looks like it's two CGI characters who are fighting each other, rather than Pablo in the suit versus basically any sort of stand-in for the CGI. Like this section here, it just doesn't feel like it's two people fighting. It just doesn't feel real, and it doesn't look real. Now that all said, this is the chief that we should have had the whole time. If we'd have had someone who was like this, who was badass, and in his suit, regardless of how ridiculous the story was, if we'd have had more of this, it would have instantly improved the show no end. Now, I couldn't actually believe that they killed the Arbiter. Now, I know that this guy is not the same Arbiter as we know from the games, but nothing else is the same either, so it may well actually be the representation of the Arbiter. And if this is supposed to be the Arbiter, then it's a massively aggressive deviation, and I can't exactly see them writing another Arbiter who then again betrays the Covenant. But actually, then again, maybe they will, because this won't be the first time that they've recycled content.
This will stop the progression. I'll bring you back.
So a couple of problems. Obviously the base is pretty much overrun at this point. There were zombies outside the lab the last time. Now granted they may not have fully turned, but how did she get Halsey from where she was to a cryo tube, and in response to her, "I will fix you," no, you bloody won't. Now, if she cures Halsey in season 3, I'm pretty sure I'm checking out immediately. That's assuming I even check in. The Forerunners were light years beyond us technologically, and they couldn't find a cure for the Flood. The only thing that they could do was contain the Flood by exterminating all life that could serve as a vessel or food for the Flood, and then repopulating the universe afterwards. So if their only option was mass extermination of all life in the galaxy, it would be immensely insulting and almost certainly universe breaking if she suddenly comes up with a cure. So there's Kai, still in one piece. So like I said, she will be alive, you just need to wait till season 3 to find out. But one point I would just like to raise. So you can see how intact, largely, this Covenant ship is, and yet the explosion of these two ships connecting was supposed to wipe out half of the Covenant fleet, supposedly, and the UNSC ships. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be significantly huge sections of ship, and it definitely wouldn't mostly be attached. It's just not believable. So, despite all evidence to the contrary, all of the canon that says that the humans should lose, they won the space fight inexplicably. No one knows how, because like I said before, they're supposed to lose 3 ships for every 1 ship that they destroy. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and every single scene where we see the fleet battle, and granted, it's only small snippets, all we see is UNSC ships exploding. So, I think that's just a plot mechanism in order to push the story in the way that they want to move it, despite the fact that it's completely not believable by the universe that you've set up.
What don't I know?
That I'm a demon too.
No, you're not. You're a joke, an afterthought, and a completely unnecessary addition to what was a better story when you didn't actually exist.
It is awake because you are here. You are here because it is awake.
Now, what is the Monitor referring to? Is it the awakening of the Flood? I'm pretty sure it's Gravemind, and they are literally just taking the Halo 2 storyline and injecting it into the first Halo installation. Now, I know because it's the season end that they are trying to be ambiguous to sucker us in for a 3rd season, but there's just so many unanswered questions that I think they could spend an entire season plugging these gaps.
It's been down there all this time, waiting.
Now, this is where ultimately my confusion comes in, and the reason is, the Monitor now says it is down there waiting. But at the beginning of the episode, he asks, what was that down there? So, the intro of the episode, the way it makes it sound, happens after this conversation with the Monitor. So that means that, because we're obviously right near the season end, that there's missing material between this conversation and the first conversation, which is why I said it was strange that they chose to start off the episode in such a way, because it would make sense if you were relaying the story to Monitor and then it ends, basically, with Monitor tasking him to do something. But the way it can be read is that the first conversation happens after the last conversation. But that then means that there's a fairly significant amount of missing content where John has basically already been down there and either met the Flood or seen Gravemind, which just makes the whole episode seem unfinished or unfulfilled. But it's worse than that, because the next thing that we see is John put on his helmet and it's broken, which also means that there's missing context and missing content, not only between John entering the installation and this conversation, but also potentially, if obviously you read the first conversation the way that I have, missing context and content between this conversation and the first conversation. So we're missing a lot of stuff from this episode. It's just crap. This is not just because we're missing a massive amount of context, but this episode has left me with even more whys and questions and confusion than any episode we've had today. And that's genuinely impressive, because so little of this series has actually made any sense full stop. Well, guys, what did you think of that? Feel free to let me know below. But with that, that's the end of the season. Now, I've watched this a couple of times, and there's a lot of things that don't quite sit right with me. And I might just be losing my mind because I've been subject to this for 8 episodes, but the ending doesn't even feel like it makes sense. And it's because of how they structured the episode to begin with. They gave us that intro part with Monitor, and if we take that into consideration and compare it with the ending, it just doesn't feel like the script even works out. It makes it very confusing as to when those conversations are taking place. And what I mean by this is the intro conversation with Monitor says, what the hell happened down there? What is that thing? And Monitor says, dark places contain dark things. So the assumption is that there's the flood down there. It's the first time that Chief has come into contact with it. Or more likely, it's Gravemind. So at that point, at the beginning of the intro, John has met or seen Gravemind before the actual ending of the episode, and we just haven't been shown it. But then the final conversation suggests that Monitor needs him to go see the thing that is now awake because John is here, and that he is here because that thing is awake, and that it's been waiting for him, which I'm pretty sure we're just skipping the storyline of Halo 1 here and jumping straight to the storyline of Halo 2, or some sort of weird bastardization of the two. But John asks what it is, and then the Monitor doesn't answer and just says, I'll be watching you. Okay. Now, we clearly have a season end where things we don't know about have clearly occurred off screen. And that in itself is confusing me fairly significantly. But what I think is adding to my confusion at this point is that the final conversation with the Monitor can be read like it either happened before the intro conversation as well as after the intro conversation. So John could have... So basically, either we have missing content between Chief entering the complex and the intro of this episode, or we have missing content between the end of this episode and the beginning of the episode. And I know that that might sound fucking stupid and people might not quite understand that, but that's how I took it. Either way, we are missing fairly significant amount of content. And with how bad the writing's been, pretty much full stop, I can't tell you which retarded route they've got. Because either John has gone into the complex and then ran around the complex a bit, bumped into the creature down below, Gravemind, and then basically escaped and got to the Monitor where he's then being quizzed. Or we have missing content there, and then John has met the Monitor, gone through the episode, spoke to the Monitor at the end who will be watching him, and then the beginning of the episode is after he's been down to see Gravemind, because it can be read that way. And I'm just confused. Like, the artistic decision to start the episode that way and end it in that way, I think is one of the larger issues of the entire episode. And this entire episode has left me with more whys and more confusion than any episode to date, which is just about the most impressive thing of this season, because nothing really has made sense, or any plausible sense, rather. Full stop. Now, begrudgingly, I will admit this episode has some moments that are decent. Perhaps even, I'd use the word, refreshing, compared to the form that it's had in the past. Those moments are just surrounded by utter shit, though, that you have to wade through for another moment that's reasonable. And to be honest, it's just unforgivable what they've done to the Halo universe. They had a template from the content that they had, the books and the games, and that content has told the story infinitely better than this show's found possible. This show's tried to add to the universe and ultimately ended up significantly worse for it. More so, it raises so many plausibility issues with regards to the storytelling. In this episode, I'd go as far as how Onyx falls is probably one of the biggest plausibility issues, and that's before we even start talking about how retarded a biologist has to be in order to meddle with an unknown artifact which has spores on it when you don't know what those spores are. Like, that is just mind-breaking as to how retarded it is. But even if we put that aside, how does the entire base fall without anyone knowing that there's something wrong until the point where basically the entire base is lost? It just doesn't make sense, and it just isn't plausible. Now, if you take, and I know this is stretching the imagination a little bit, but if you take something like Resident Evil and the outbreak of the T-virus, you have, in Raccoon City, in story, you have stories of people being eaten alive, being bitten, people being taken to hospital only to turn there, because that's a plausible spread. It starts with one individual, which is the epicenter. In this case, that is Janine. Now, this, on the other hand, lacks all credibility because of the nature of how this outbreak looks compared to that outbreak. In an outbreak of anything, you have ground zero. You usually have an epicenter or an individual where the outbreak begins. In this case, it's Janine, the retarded biologist. So it should spread from her or anyone that she comes into contact. Now, what we know before the HQ goes down, and basically you have the bloodbath that's in there, is Soren has already waded through an entire floor of basically zombified guys who are turning into the Flood. Janine took time to be infected, and surely if there was an area of the base that wasn't responding, they'd know that there was an issue, they'd send someone to investigate, they'd then basically discover it, or someone would escape from these areas which have been infected, or they wouldn't instantly lose their minds. I guess there's just so many possibilities for an alarm to be raised, and they're all plausible reasons why the alarm would be raised, that a fall in this type wouldn't be possible unless it was happening simultaneously in all places, which it isn't, because there's one individual where it starts at. And yet, because this is completely unexplainable why the base is falling without anyone raising an alarm, they just plow forward with it to say that, yes, this is how it happened, and they just expect you to accept it. Now, they could have had the fall of the base and just been a bit more methodical. The biology levels, the labs, they start going down, someone escapes, it's an absolute shit show, and then ultimately what happens is base personnel's attention starts to turn from the battle to a meaningful defense of the base, but ultimately they get overwhelmed, the base falls, but you could have had an action sequence as a response to the release of the Flood on the base. And it would have been a significantly better way to develop that story, and a far more plausible response to the release of a contagion. Let's say, I guess we can class the Flood as a contagion. It would have just been a better end and a more developed way to tell that story. And I don't understand why they kind of copped out of that very simple decision. And all I can assume is it's down to the pacing. They wanted it to be done and over with very, very, very quickly. To the point where they just ignored this. They just went, yep, the base fell. Because that's how it feels. It's literally just a throwaway statement like, oh yeah, Onyx is gone. And that's it. Now, if it isn't a pacing issue, then it's definitely a breadth of content issue. They are trying to push so many different story arcs through in this one episode. It's just not possible to do any of them justice. Now, as I said earlier, in this episode, this should have been 3 episodes. And with the amount of content that they've tried to push through, it would have been very simple to do that. They would have been able to have you engage with all of the things that are going on. They would have been able to have you develop. All of the character losses would have been harder hitting because they wouldn't have effectively just done this scattergun approach where literally 1 minute to the next, you're dealing with completely different characters in the show. And by stretching it again, you would have increased the plausibility factor and possibly even made all of these episodes coherent and actually good. You could have developed and spent time with the space battle. You could have developed and spent time with the Spartans and shown a lot more of the combat. You could have had a base defense from the infection. You could have had a more meaningful interaction from Chief. As I've said before, the payoff from this episode just isn't there. Now, this isn't the first time that they've done this. They chose to abort what could have been an epic storyline with the fall of Reach in order to build up to this. And I, for one, feel robbed. Because they could quite easily, from episode 4, done episode 4 to 7 of a fighting retreat on Reach, untold stories, had Perez involved. You could have had meaningful deaths, sacrifices, last stands, and then basically had them escape off the planet on the Pillar of Autumn as they did in the games and end up at the Halo Fade to Black. And I think that if they'd have stuck to the original storyline there, we would have gotten a significantly better finale. In fact, we'd have gotten a better season, let's face it. And we look at actually what we walked away with from their approach. An episode where they taunted you, literally waved a red flag of a giant Covenant fleet, and you're thinking, okay, there's going to be a fleet battle. They're sending in the fleet. And in total, we see about a minute. And it's all in either 1 second flashes or 5 to 15 second clips. We almost see the display of the red and green ships in the HQ as much as we actually see the combat. And that's just crap. They burnt through all of the action sequences and meaningful content just like they did in episode 4. And because they did that, the loss of every character lacks any emotional impact. Now, the loss of Vanek was just sad. The loss of Keyes was just hollow. I mean, he had an okay last line, but he needn't have died. And the losses just felt muted because of how the story had been rushed through. And now we've seen it again with Perengovsky, Halsey, Kai, even though we all know that Kai isn't dead. And I didn't really care about any of them, because A, I knew Kai wasn't dead. I didn't like Perengovsky, and she was hollow, and she wasn't even the same character that she was in season 1. Halsey ended up looking like a pure fucking nutter, and also wasn't the same character that we had in season 1, so I really didn't know how to feel about her at all. The only death I actually cared about was Soren's wife, and I know she's not technically dead, but it was just so unexpected that it was actually refreshing. Because, I'll be honest, I thought that she was just going to walk out of there. And apart from that, the only other time that I really cared was when I thought Quan was going to die. And that wasn't because I was gutted, because I was genuinely celebrating it. And then it turned out just to be a blue ball moment. I was left there wanting her to be eaten. And she has Space Girl magic. I mean, that's what I'm going to call it, Space Girl magic. Her ghost mate, who we still don't know actually what she is or who she is her ancestor or the protector before her and can control the flood. And I'm guessing that she is going to develop those powers so that the writers can finally achieve what they've been trying to do for 2 seasons and make her a focal point of the whole story. Because now, also, Chief has space powers. So both of them have space magic. But Chief's is, I want to say more retarded, but they're both pretty retarded. His space powers basically mean that he can affect the outcome of anything he wants, and from how they've made it sound, he can choose not to die, and therefore he won't die. Because he can just bend the universe to his will. He punches a console, and for no explainable reason is able to download Cortana into his suit, despite from the way that they've presented Chief, his suit, everything from season 1 onwards. His suit isn't made to do that in this universe. Or he punched the console and re-downloaded her into his brain. And I don't fucking know which. It's not explained. I don't think the fucking writers know what they're doing. And if anyone else has any understanding what went on, please, for the love of God, enlighten me. Because I think this entire thing was, you know what'll be cool? If he just punches a console and downloads Cortana. And they gave 0 fucks or 0 thought to the reasoning as to why or how. And I was just left going, this is just bollocks. And now, basically, we're left with 2 people who are clearly going to be the main characters going forward, both with their own bullshit forms of space magic. And it's just raw, untreated sewage just fucking spraying everywhere. I can't believe I'm actually going to sit here and say this. And this is what I would consider a hot take. If you disagree, you're welcome to. But I'm actually coming round to the idea that we had a better TV show in season 1. It might have felt not quite as like Halo, as in it didn't feel like fucking Halo at all. But I think it was less nonsense and actually had more substance and more plausibility, even though all of their reasoning was bullshit, much like this season. I just think it was better. The good parts of season 1 sure as shit outclassed anything in season 2. We had better fights. We had a more grounded storyline in season 1, even though it didn't really make that much sense. It was still better than this. We had more variety of Covenant. We had better CGI. This is a weird thing to say, that it's I guess a plus point for season 1, but they hadn't actually addressed any of the major plot pieces of the Halo universe yet, and therefore hadn't completely shit the bed and underwhelmed when it came to events that realistically should have been epic. But, you know what? Those are my thoughts. If you've liked the video, please like it. And if you could, please subscribe for future content. But with that, that's it for me. So that's it for you.